We have the reform cycle starts in October when the World Bank report is published, and we get a sense of, where have we performed well, what are the areas that we need to improve, what reforms might not have been recorded as implemented. And then we have just until April to make sure that, we've resolved all those issues. Our deadline to have implemented reforms is end of April. So obviously it's a very tight timeline that we're working with, but also Rwanda is, as I said, one of the most committed economies towards implementing the doing business framework to improve our business environment. And so we have always set reforms that are quite ambitious, reforms that typically take other countries several years to implement, and we tend to implement those within a single reform cycle. And that is what I think, the CEO of RDB mentioned has led us to being recognized as the top global reformer of all time by the World Bank. They try to look at the life cycle of a business and what different things will a business need as it starts up, as it's operating and running, as it's growing, and potentially if it needs to close. The two where we still have a lot of room to improve are in getting electricity and dealing with construction permits, which is where a lot of emphasis was put this time around. With getting electricity, historically the biggest issue has been the cost of electricity vis-a-vis our GDP per capita. We might not necessarily have the highest costs in relative to other countries, but other countries have a much higher GDP per capita, and so the cost relative is a lot lower. But for an economy of our size, we still have issues around the costs. There's also been issues around reliability of supply, and that's something that actually the World Bank recently expanded its methodology on to see how often are you having power outages and how long do those power outages last, because these are things that strongly affect industry. Rwanda has a very strong track record of holding public institutions accountable to what it is we promise. So we design a reform action plan every year, which is agreed on in the usual spirit of consensual discussions and resolution. But I think what has helped us also a lot is that we actually do have a structural framework around the doing business reforms, which is not necessarily the case everywhere else. You do have, as I said, the president as a champion, but you also have a doing business steering committee that is made up of all the ministers and heads of agencies that need to implement. You then have the technical committee of, the technicians and the doing business coordination unit at RDB.